Begin the current Daf Mesechtes Nedarim Daf Yud Beis. We begin on the bottom line of Daf Yud Alpha Beis, where the Gemara started the question relating to the halacha of the Mishnah, which was speaking about this concept of atfasa, which is if you say that this should be like a carbon, so you're saying you're saying just like a carbon is forbidden, which is a carbon only comes through a vow that you take. This should also have that halacha of neder. Now the question we had asked was a unique case regarding if you taking a carbon that the blood was already sprayed, and you're saying this should be like this. Now, what does it mean this like this? Is this like the initial inception of this, which was a neder, and that's what made it forbidden? But right now, it's not forbidden based on the neder, the way the Ran especially explained it. Maybe you have davarim hasurim, that's not davar another. So right now would not make hatfasa. So what are you transferring, the ikar or the heter? That's the question the Gemara asked. Some of this is discussed in today's daf, like we had mentioned in the previous daf. These are the dafim of discussing hatfasa, which is considered regular and fully valid neder, which you're transferring from one thing to another. But like we said, it's only effective with davar another, but not effective with davar ha'asa. It has to be davar ha'asa like kikarbon, not kinavela. That won't be effective. Now, hatfasa to a carbon, which is the question we're asking, that was originally asa to be eaten, but is now mutter to be eaten. The Gemara's question we had said was, Bikara kamatras? Are you going the essence of the meat that was mukdash and you're transferring that neder? Or no, bater kamatras, because the current state of the meat is that it's mutter. So would that be forbidden, that what you're transferring or not? The Gemara discussed also nicer, which nicer is that first it went through a stage where the original isser was completely removed, because if it was mutter as a carbon, and then it only subsequently became forbidden because it was left over. So therefore, nicer is really considered davar ha'aser, not a davar another, because the isser that it has is a gizei sakasev of carbon, but not through your neder per se. Hatfasa be'bukhari, the Gemara has a whole discussion. On the one hand, the moment the bukhar is born, it's automatically mukdash. On the other hand, in the name of Rebbe, they said that a bukhar is a mitzvah to be makdashit, like it says hazacha takdash. So is it considered davar hanader? Yeah, on the one hand, you're supposed to make it say it's a bukhar, it's my wording that's making. On the other hand, it's really born like that. So maybe it's not really a davar hanader, it's automatic. So we begin the current daf. We had said that, look, like when you have a carbon shlamim, after you spray the blood, the meat becomes mutter to be eaten. So the question the Gemara asked was, if you say that like this should be like this, which is the meat of the shlamim after the blood was sprayed, you didn't say those actual words, because that would for sure mean yimatfes b'davar hamutter. The question is, so are you matfes be'ikar, and therefore it's going to be aser, or is it be'ter kamatfes? So that's where our Gemara continues and says, Amar Rava. It's the bottom line of the Alpha Base. It says, Tashmat, being right from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, one of the cases of the middle category, which is what we're middle discussing, the Gemara said, if you say, Neisa masha eichalach, pigel masha eichalach, we said, okay, that's going to be forbidden, like as if you took a neder. Says the Gemara on the top of your Beis Amid Aleph, wait a second. For Neiser, a pigel, you know what Neiser is? The Ran says to take out the word, some don't have the gears of pigel, because if you had pigel, which is a machshava zara, a forbidden thought, when you were doing the avodah, the tzrika actually would not permit it. It actually would remain forbidden as a neder. The Gemara's question is from Neiser. Neiser, what happens is that the isser of your neder gets removed the moment the blood is sprayed on the mizbeach. It's only subsequently, if you didn't eat it in the given time, Torah says it's leftovers, it's usher, you can't eat it. Now wait a second. That's a davar that you're saying that it's going to be usher if you say like nicer. But wait a second, nicer is really a davar ha'asr. The only way it would be quote unquote a davar ha'nadar is if your matfas beikarai, where it started. So you have a raya from the Mishnah. It must be beikarai matfas, and not be'atera, not where it is right now. Because right now, even though it's usr, it's davar ha'asr, not davar ha'nadar. And we already said that neder of atfasa can only be with davar ha'nadar. So the Gemara rejects the raya. No, Amalei Rav Huna B'Ridam Nasan. He says, you know what we're talking about over here? We're talking about b'neiser shel oila. We're talking about a carbon that was left over its time of a totally burned sacrifice. So even if you're going to say that what he's transferring is where it is right now, the neder was never removed, because the oil is always forbidden to be eaten even after the blood is sprayed. So it's still going to have the davar hanadar of the prohibition even after blood is sprayed. So it's not a raya that be kol, it can even be that bahashta. But on that Malay, Rabbi says to him, wait a second. Imkain, if you tell me that the Mishnah is talking about when you're being matris and the nicer is a carbon oila specifically, then listen to basar oila. Then why do you have to go on to nicer? Say the meat of a carbon oila. In other words, as the Ran explains, if you're going to say that we're not talking about an oila, I could understand why you're picking the case of nicer to tell me be kavik matris, that we're going to go not where it is right now. because right now it's mutter, rather based on where it originally was. But if you say talking about carbon oila, so what's the chiddush of nicer? What? That the neder was never removed? If that's the case, the meat of the oila was never moved. You don't need nicer. Now the Ran actually does point out, according to what I explained, the Mishnah says the Ran, that by nicer and pigel, Rabbi Yehuda does not require a kaf hadim. You don't have to say kin nicer, kin pigel. The truth is, the Gemara could have answered that the reason why we said nicer and pigel, we didn't say the bus of oilas to tell us that by these, even without a kaf hadim, it's going to be aser. And that's specifically for these cases. He says the Gemara, however, answered better, but he just pointed out that thing itself. But says the Gemara, so if that's the case, why are you saying nicer? Just say any meat of oila. That neder never was removed. The Gemara says, no, it's not difficult because I don't have to tell you that. In other words, I don't have to tell you that the meat of a carbon oil that it's going to be aser because it's a neder because of a carbon kamatfis. That you're actually doing the hatfasa on the carbon itself. You're saying the meat of the oil. But nicer pigel the oil itzracha. That I had to actually tell you a chiddush. That salget that I would have thought to say ki iser nicer, ki iser pigel, which when I say nicer, I mean the isra of nicer or the isra of pigel. And therefore I would have thought to say it's doing atfasa and something that's forbidden and not a davar another, even though the original neder is still here, but I'm telling you specifically nicer. I must be going on the isra of nicer. Oh, that's not a davar another, and therefore there's not be forbidden. Kamash Malan, that's what we're coming to tell you, that specifically we're telling you nicer and pigel to tell you that no, we don't mean the isra of nicer and pigel. Rather, that we're saying that nicer is the nicer itself, and pigel is the pigel itself, which was a davar another. But again, therefore, there's no raya, says the Gemara, to ikar kamatfis, because we're not talking about a carbon shlamim, like let's say that now it's permitted. We're talking about carbon oil, which was always forbidden. So why saying nicer? Just say the meat. I want to tell you, added chiddush. You would have thought maybe nicer would not be. It would be davar aser, not davar another. I'm telling you, no, it's including still the davar another.
The neder is how because it wasn't early before, so
but it's even now. It would still be bahashto kamatfis if it was an oila. So nothing really is removed. Nothing ever changed. There's no before or after. It's always the same as it was, because the zikis dam doesn't permit anything. So if you would pick a case of oila, so what's the chiddush in saying nicer? There's no real chiddush in nicer. If you say it's shlomim, so then there's a chiddush in nicer to say, wait a second, nicer is davar ha'aser. So the Gemara rejects it, says no, it's not true. It could be talking about oila, because there is a chiddush in nicer. What's the chiddush in oila? Nothing changes. You could just say basar. No, I would have thought actually it's worse when you say nicer, because it's davar ha'aser, not a davar another. They say no, we're saying specifically nicer to tell you that's chiddush, but I could be talking about oila. And therefore it doesn't say anything about be'ikar gematis. Obviously not, because the oila there's no ikar and there's no hashta. It's always the same. But there's added chiddush in the fact of saying the case of nicer. So there's no raya to this halacha of ikar or hashta kamaisa. So the Gemara says meiser. The Gemara asks, according to the one who holds that beteru kamatvis, according to one that would want to say that it goes based on where it is right now, the Gemara says, wait a second, I have a difficulty from a brisa. The brisa says, Ezeu isser am batera. What's the isser of neder, which is said in the Torah? Amar, where a guy says, Hadeini, I am, shloi oichel basa, that I'm not eating meat. But actually, I'm not going to drink wine. Or he says, Kiyam, and he says, Kiyam shemes be'aviv, like the day that his father passed away, Kiyam shemes be'dabai, and the day that his Rebbe passed away, Kiyam shenerik be'y Gedai ben Achikim, and the day that Gedai ben Achikim, which with Tzem Gedaya, like the day that he died, or Kiyam shirisi Yerushalayim b'chaban, like the day I saw Yerushalayim in its destruction. If a guy says things like this, that I'm going to be forbidden to eat or to drink, like these days, which you have to fast, it's a yard side or whatever, so then that's the case of a neder that he's saying that this should be like that, and therefore it's going to be forbidden. Now, Vamash Moshmud qualified this brayse, and he said, this is if he had taken the vow on that day. What does that mean? So the Ran explains. The Gemara assumes it means to say that he had already taken the vow on the day that his father passed away, that he's not going to eat meat. Also, he had taken the vow one time that he's not going to eat meat on the day that Gedai ben Achikim passed away. And now, he's being matfis another day to be like that day. So, we see that since he had taken a vow mi'ikara, right now when he's being matfis that, he's being matfis that day. So the Gemara says, hey, what's the case talking about? Lav Kagoin, isn't it talking about the Koi Bechad B'Shaba, the Misbe'avu? He's on the same Sunday that his father passed away. In other words, he says on the Sunday, which was the day that his father passed away, according to the counting of the months. For example, let's say that on the first Sunday of Nisan, he says, this day should be on me like the first Sunday of Nisan that his father passed away. Although there are many Sundays that were mutter, still he wants to be like that original Sunday that he had said he's going to be forbidden because his father passed away or Gedai ben Achikim passed away. And still we say that this is going to be an Isra of a Neder. Says the Gemara, obviously you're transferring the Iker, as the Ran explains. The Gemara understands that this is how you're interpreting it, that it's going, the guy had once taken a Neder on that Sunday, and now he's saying, I want to be like that Sunday. So, well, since then there's been many Sundays that he hasn't been usher. It's very debated how to exactly translate every word over here, but that's basically this idea. There's been many Sundays that he hasn't, but you see he's going to become usher because, like that Sunday. Well, that Sunday had many Sundays since then, and you want that same Sunday of that time, because he says, if the guy said explicitly, I want this day to be like the day that his father passed away, obviously it's going to be usher. Rather, obviously, he's talking about where he says, I want this day to be like the first Sunday in Nisan. And we're coming to tell you that even though you could say Bet Terek Matvis, because he's on the day, according to the time of month that his father passed away, and he's saying that I want this day to be like Sunday, well, which Sunday? Which Sunday in Nisan? There were many Sundays in Nisan that you didn't. Years ago you had. But if you're saying that it should be like that Sunday, obviously you're going to be Ikari Kamatvis the way it originally was, not the way it is right now. Something like that the Gemara is trying to say. And that's the Gemara says, no, the Shmuel Hachidma, it's not a right Ikari Kamatvis. What Shmuel is saying, or Amar Shmuel, he says, what we're talking about is that, in other words, what he means to say is, every single Sunday that has passed, that the day that his father passed away, they were all forbidden on him like a neder. And if that's the case, you cannot learn that from over here, from this halacha, to say the chiddush of bikari kamatvis, because over here, there were never any Sundays after that Sunday. Every Sunday of that was always forbidden from then on. So there's no bikari and kahashta. Now, the Ram points out that this sugya is what's called ketiyah, like an amputated sugya. Because the Gemara doesn't ask, wait a second, what's the chiddush then? Obviously, that you've always been forbidden on all those Sundays, there's no ikir and there's no hashta. But it says it relies on the sugi in the beginning of Peg Shavuot Shtayim Basra in Masech Shavuos that says over there that this wording that Shmuel says over here, literally word for word, and it says V'hushanada ba ma'isayim. And the Gemara asks that obviously, and the Gemara answers, you're right, you don't need it for that case. You need it for the day when Gedai ben Achikim was killed. So the Gemara asks on that also, Hanami Peshita, what do you mean? The Gemara says, no, what would you think to say? That because since even without a neder, you're rabbinically forbidden to eat on Sam Gedaliah, so when you take a neder, the neder should not take effect, and he's not being matras b'dav another, Mashmalan, that's going to be considered matras b'dav another. Or additionally, says the Ran, you could say that sugya holds that even though it's not really comparable, this hatfasa to carbon, which is forbidden to everyone, because you're only for making it forbidden for himself, even so, it's still considered matras b'dav hanadr. And since from the Maskana in Masech Shavuos, you actually learn out from this to a case of, let's say, someone takes a neder from Gvinas Akum, or Stam Yain, or the fat of the Gid, and he does hatfasa on them, although rabbinically they're forbidden, it's considered hatfasa b'dav hanadr, and it's going to be usher because although rabbinically it's forbidden, but it's still only rabbinically, and you're making usher for you, and therefore that's going to work. Again, that's what the chiddush had the halacha would be. But again, it's not a right to ikari kamatvis or mahashta because there's no ikar in hashta. It's not the me'isayim ba'elach. Now the Gemara continues and says, Amar Ravina, he wants to bring another right. Tashma from the Gemara in the Mishnah on the next stuff in the Gimel base. The Mishnah says, if someone says that kachalas Aaron, let this be for me like the chala of Aaron, or like his truma, so mutter, it's going to be permitted. Why? Even though the title that he's saying is something that's usher, but since it's not usher for everyone, that if it would be like a neder, it would be considered a dava ha'usher and not a dava ha'nadr, because these are things that it's not a neder. Chala is is something in truma. These are things that it's not a neder. You have an obligation to separate. They're isser. So if you say this should be like that davar us, it's going to be mutter. The question is, it sounds like hakatrumas lachmei taida, which is not mentioned in that Mishnah. There's one challah that you take from all the 10 challahs of every of the 4 types. When you bring a carbon taida, you bring these 4 types of breads, and each type has 10 breads. You're supposed to separate one from each 10 to give it to the kohen. Sounds like that would be aser, because that's being matves b'dava hanadar, because carbon taida is a neder. Sounds like only challah and truma, that those are not with neder. Those are going to be mutter, but trumas lachmei taida would be aser. Says the Gemara on Amud Beis, but trumas lachmei taida. But wait a second. When you separate the breads of the taida, you know when that's done? Lachazrik is done. It's after the blood of the carbon was already sprayed, as the Ran explained, because since the lachmei taida is not permitted to be eaten until after the blood is sprayed, why would a person separate them and give it to the kohen beforehand? From the fact that you say, we're inferring from the Mishnah Daf Yud Gimel, that if someone would say that it should be like trumas lachmei taida, it would be aser. Wait a second. But right now, it's betera. Ooh, obviously you don't go kedahashta. Obviously you go and your matves be karan. The Gemara says, no. Ema, say a different diuk. Don't say ketrumas lachmei taida would be aser. No, say that ketrumas halishka, that would be aser. Meaning, they would separate monies from the chamber where all the machzah shekels were, and they filled up 3 buckets. That would be aser, because that's people making Nedarim, that's to give these machzah shekel. That was neder from the people, that's going to be aser. So wait a second. So what are you telling me? But if it was the truma of the breads of the taida that you tell me mutter, that would be permitted, because that would be kedahashta, that would be be'atera komatfus. But listen, if that's the case, let the Mishnah on the next daf say a bigger chiddush. Let the Mishnah say lachmei taida. If you say that this should be like the breads of the taida, it's going to be mutter. And because truma have a short, just a regular truma, that would be a bigger chiddush. Because initially, the lachmei taida are forbidden as a neder, and you'd be telling me a chiddush that, oh, but we don't go matfas bikar, and you go the way it is right now. So why only picking regular truma, which is the isser, say a bigger chiddush, say something even that was a neder, but right now it's not. So the Girsa takes out the next 2 words, but trumas lachmei taida, trumasahi. That is his truma. In other words, when we said in the Mishnah, kitrumasai, it means that the trumas lachmei taida, because it's just like truma that's forbidden for non-kahanim. So that actually is included in the Mishnah on the next daf. Or if you want, you could say that chalas aron is a isser. You have to separate, but that's done by isser. But it's not a neder. There's no neder. A carbon taida is a neder, and then you have that you separate and you give to the kohen. Now the Gemara says another approach. Even if you're going to say that beterid kamatvis, I could give you an answer and explain to you. So wait a second. So why didn't we say trumas lachmei taida? The first answer says included the word trumasai. The second answer says no, because trumas lachmei taida nami, you could have it that it was taken kodim zrikas damhu, before the blood was sprayed, and that's why the Tana of the Mishnah on next daf couldn't say explicitly that if you say it should be like trumas lachmei taida, it should be mutter, because there are cases the trumas lachmei taida is going to be aser when you took it and you separated before the zrikas adam, which then it would have a lacha like a davar nader. It's not permitted yet. There's no hashta of hetera. Kagain, when do you have that lachmei taida can be separated before the blood was sprayed? Kagain dafreshina balisha, when you separated when you were still kneading it, which the Ram points out that the Gemara could have answered that you separated even after it was baked, just before the blood was sprayed, because the baking was done before, even before the slaughtering of the carbon. It's just because we're going to bring a raya from Rav Taivi that you could separate it before the blood was sprayed, and Rav Taivi is talking about that you separated when they were still kneading the dough. So if we say it when you were kneading the dough, but really it doesn't have to be, it could even be when it was baked. But yeah, that's why maybe it was done when they were still kneading the dough, which was before the blood was sprayed. Like he says the following halacha. It says, lachmei taida sha'afon ba'al b'chalas. The breads of the taida, which were baked in 4 types of chalas. Not 40, but 4. Yatsi, you filled your obligation. It says the Gemara Ivok Sevar Bom, but the Torah tells us to be 40 because it was 4 types, and of chametz, challah, rikikin, and revucha, and each type had 10. So how could it be enough if you make 4? So the Gemara says limit. So that's just limit. So as long as you have the 4 types, even if you didn't make of each type 10, you made 1, that's going to be okay. But says the Gemara, but you run into a problem if you did this, because baboy lemishkol truma, you have to separate from each type and give it to the kohen. And b'chitim, you're going to say no problem. The shakal chadar iftal kula, that you give him one of the 4 breads and you gave him a portion, But not the Mishnah teaches Mesechus Menachos that it says in the pasuk in Vayikra that you're going to sacrifice from it echad mikol carbon, one from each carbon is going to be truma to Hashem, to the kohen who sprays the blood of the shlam. He gets it, which teaches shlo yitnu carbon lachaver. You're not taking one carbon on the other one. So you can't take one of the 4 types of bread and give it to him, and then you keep the other 3, because he has to have from each type. You can't take from one type of carbon on another. If you're going to say no problem, the shakal prus mikol chad b'chad, no problem. You'll break off a piece. You make only 4 breads, each type only 1. You break off a piece from each one. No, but now we learn in the Mishnah, the pasuk says with the echad, which is 1 whole. Shlita prus, they shouldn't take a broken piece. So how could it be that you went and you separated truma when you were still needing it? Says the Gemara, el daf reshina belisha. Rather, what are we talking about? That you separated when you were doing the kneading. In other words, from each and every type. And where you go ahead and the shakal chada michametz, you take 1 from chametz, chada min chalas, 1 from the chalas, which is the matzah, chada min rekikim, 1 from the wafer, chada min rebucha, 1 from the scalded one. And mean to say that you go ahead and you make 10 chalas from each type, and after you separate 1 from each type, then they went and they kneaded the 9 of each type, and he made 1 challah from each and every one. So you could technically have that you're going to give him a whole challah. At the end of the day, you're still going to make 1 baked challah because you needed it as separate. But then you give him 1, and then you go ahead and you bake it all together. But one thing is, the Gemara says there's no raya to the question that we had asked to be medayik from the Isra of Chumas Lachmei Toida, that we said, wait a second, the Mishnah on the next daf only says, you know what the case is going to be? That it's going to be mutter if you say Kichumasai or Chala, but the diak was, but let's say Chumas Lachmei Toida, that's going to be Aser. How could that be Aser? That's already after the Zrikas Adam, and that's already mutter. Obviously, be Karan Kamatvis. The Gemara says no. Either because it actually is included in the Mishnah on the next daf, Kichumasa means also Chumas Lachmei Toida, or no, it's not going to be mutter because there are cases when it is a dava hanada, when it's done before the Zrikas Dam. So how can you have it before the Zrikas Dam? Like we just went through, it's not gemalt, it's not feasible to have separating for the kohen because he has to have 1 whole of each type. He said no problem. You needed 40 chalas, 10 of each type, and you gave him 1 needed in the state of dough. Then you took the remaining 9 of each type and you put it together and you baked 1 challah. So you could end up with 4 challahs, and it's not a contradiction that you had separated. And therefore, since you could technically have Chumas Lachmei Toida, even in the state of before the blood was sprayed, that's still in the state of Dava Hanadar. And therefore, if you said, kid, that this should be to me like Chumas Lachmei Toida, that would be Aser. And it's not a Raya, be Kachar Gematras, because even now, whatever that state would be, could possibly be Aser. Thank you to any time. Anything else.